So my book, as I discussed at the session, there are 5 or 6 key themes of the book. First, why Indian civilization survived while so many other great ancient civilizations did not. Ancient Egypt, ancient Persia, the Aztecs, the Incas, ancient Greece did not survive, but Indian civilization did. So the first chapter of my book addresses why Indian civilization, or Bharatiya civilization, has survived through the vicissitudes of time. I assert that Indian civilization never was fully defeated. It showed resilience through its darkest times. It was frequently in retreat, but never fully eclipsed, unlike, say, the Zarathustra, the Zoroastrian civilization of Persia, which ceased to exist. The ancient Egyptians, what we think of Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, she wasn't Egyptian at all. She was actually a descendant of the Macedonians. At any rate, that civilization ceased to exist. Ours did not. And I outline why that is. The second important theme is a revisiting of the whole story of how we defeated the British. And we did not defeat the British by ahimsa alone. In fact, ahimsa was almost a footnote to the real story. The real story was the revolutionaries. And the British did not concede anything to Gandhiji, even once. The only time they came close to conceding anything to him was in 1921-22, at the end of the non-cooperation and Khilafat agitation, when they were very close to agreeing potentially to Dominion status and a roundtable conference in January 1922. Gandhi did not come to that because Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali were still in jail, and he said they must be released if there is to be a roundtable conference. But that was the only time. Otherwise, after the Salt Satyagraha, you had the Government of India Act of 1935, which was really nothing close to independence. After Quit India, within 6 months, the Quit India movement was completely crushed. And during that 6-month period, on average, a lakh of Indians were joining the British Indian Armed Forces to fight for Britain, despite the fact that the leader had given a call for the British to quit India. So the difference was the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries in 1857-58, I call them very important revolutionaries. They fought on right until the end of 1858. But on 31st of October 1858, when Tatya Tope's army, which was basically the Gwalior army, primarily the core of it was the Gwalior army, when that army crossed the Narmada, Queen Victoria released a proclamation saying that that Britain would no longer interfere with the religions of India. And to my mind, that was the victory of that war. The victory was that Britain conceded cultural freedom to Indians. Then we got our political freedom in 1946, on 19th of February 1946, as a result of the INA's war, following which you had the INA trials. And interestingly, the 3 officers of the INA were acquitted because the British were frightened of the revolutionary consequences of punishing them in any way, leave alone executing them. They could not punish them in any way. So, they acquitted them. What happened as a result was that they hoped that this revolutionary fervor that had emerged in the country would die out. But it did not. There was a naval mutiny, there was an air force mutiny, there was a mutiny in the Madras and Jabalpur regiments of the army, which resulted in Attlee announcing on 19th February 1946 that independence would be given to India. Now, the mythology about this is that the Labour Party was about to give India independence. The 1945 Labour Party manifesto is out there in the public domain. Please look at it. There is 1/5 of a long sentence which says that that Britain will address the issue of advancing India towards self-determination, which is precise language that Montagu, the Secretary of State for India, had used on 20th August 1917. And what we got instead was the Rowlatt Act. So, had there not been the revolutionary fervour generated by the INA through the INA trials, there would have been no independence. At best, we would have got some form of moth-eaten dominion status, if that. So, the mythology, I think, needs to be shed. We need to come up with the reality of what actually happened. Similarly, during the First World War, you had the Gatherites who shook the foundations of the British Empire to such a degree that instead of Montagu's promise, what they came up with was the Rowlatt Act in March 1919. So, and before that, the partition of Bengal in 1905 was the first great act of Britain's long story of divide and rule. But they had to rescind the partition of Bengal, primarily because the revolutionaries had shaken them to their very foundations. And it happened really in this city. There are streets here where the revolutionaries were acting. And not only that, in Fort William, there was a Jat regiment which had been suborned by Baghajotin Mukherjee. Now, Baghajotin is now forgotten outside Bengal. But Baghajotin was the leader of the revolutionary movement in succession to Sri Aurobindo. Once Aurobindo Ghosh had become a Shonnashi in Pondicherry, his successor as leader was Baghajotin, and Baghajotin had suborned a big, important regiment of the army in the British Indian capital of Calcutta. And that has been suppressed. That story is almost unknown. But the point is that it was because of things like this that the partition of Bengal had to be rescinded. So they rescinded, but the British always played a chess move which was too clever, which we didn't realize at the time and only came to realize much later. So the chess move here was that they created a united Bengal in 1911-12, which had a slight preponderance of Muslims over Hindus. The original Bengal was 2/3 non-Muslim, 1/3 Muslim. The new Bengal that they created was Muslim majority. How did they do this? They kept Purulia out. Had Purulia district been included, there would have been a Hindu majority. You see, if you think about Maithili, the Maithili language was written in the Okkhor, Mithil Okkhor, was the same as Bengali Okkhor. So the script of Maithili was the same as Bengali. So had Mithila been part of the United Bengal, then there would be the preponderance of Hindus. But the trick that they played was to create a Muslim majority province, and they also had, of course, in 1906, begun the process of separate electorates, which entrenched the division between Muslims and Hindus. So the British always got the upper hand because they were in power. But the point is that the revolutionaries got all the concessions. No concession was ever made on the basis of Orange. So, similarly, now, I think the important aspect of this is that if we are, as a nation, to understand our history, then the first lesson we must understand is that the British Indian Army was very powerful. From 1838 onwards, every war that the British fought east of Suez was fought by the British Indian Army. In Singapore, where I lived, or in Hong Kong, the First and Second World War, especially Second World War, was fought by the Indian Army. It was the Punjab Regiment in Hong Kong. It was the Jat Regiment fighting in Surabaya in 1946. So, throughout Asia, from 1838 until 1946, wherever the British fought a war, or the Europeans fought a war, in fact, it was the British Indian Army that was fighting. Sadly, that strategic legacy of a really powerful army was entirely discarded between 1947 and 1962 and resulted in the catastrophe of 1962. The war with China in 1962, where within a month, China gave us such a slap that we haven't yet recovered from it. So, a nation states, unfortunately, cannot live without armies. And sadly, Gandhiji did not recognize this. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did. So if we are to be a proper nation, I think we should at least have a few of our currency notes with Netaji's picture. We shouldn't only have Gandhi as a so-called father of the nation, of a civilizational state that is 5,000 years old. And we had just Gandhi as the man who basically, unfortunately, did not first of all give us our independence. He had an important role to play, but a secondary role, secondary to the revolutionaries. And as a result of this, as a result of thinking of ahimsa as the basis of our independence, we have made errors as a nation. Important aspect of that is that a constitution anywhere is fundamentally a conservative document. It is a document aimed at preserving the existing order in a country. So we took the British Government of India Act of 1935 as the basis of our constitution, and that has had weaknesses. So we've made changes. I think we got political independence on 1946, and we got economic independence in July 1991. And since then, important further changes have occurred, including, most importantly, now we've just had labour market reforms that modernize India's labour market that have just been notified this week, which I think have the revolutionary potential of unleashing the labour-intensive manufacturing that has not occurred in India over the last 75 years, but that must occur. Throughout history, if you go back to Megasthenes, who visited Chandragupta Maurya's court, he was marveling at the textiles in India. If you look at, in 1708, the British were marveling at how their cloth, their towels, their curtains, everything was made of Indian cloth. So throughout history, we were the clothier to the world. But somehow, since independence, others have become the clothiers to the world, and we have missed that boat. We need to rejoin that story and again become the clothiers to the world. And one way to do it is through the important labour market reforms. If we do that, we'll have an inclusive economic revolution that will remake India as a more equal society and a more successful economy.